Hello everybody, Chocolate Guy here, and welcome back to another countdown. In a continuation of a series of countdowns I'm releasing throughout October, after looking at the worst classic Nicktoons Halloween episodes last week, in this video I will be looking at the best classic Nicktoons Halloween episodes. While this wasn't the most amazing roster of episodes, there are still some really fantastic ones, especially my top 3, which made me very excited to make this list. If you haven't checked out my worst list yet, I suggest you do so as it sets up this video, but for those who haven't seen that video or any of my other classic Nicktoons lists, any episodes from Doug to Avatar count for this list, quality of the entire series be damned. Alright, with all that out of the way, let's stop wasting time and get right into it.
It's a jack-o'-lantern, Tommy. See?
So this came as a little bit of a surprise. I've only seen a few episodes of All Real Monsters, and while it has a great concept and a great use of the Klasky Chupa art style, nothing I had seen was really anything more than decent. But this episode, which is the first of the series, is a blast. The episode has so much fun with the concept of its world and goes all in on everything it tries to accomplish. As I said, the world is super fun, and I love all the weird monster designs, especially on our main characters. I also really like our main characters themselves, and how distinct they are, and the great dynamic the three of them have. Especially with the Grumble, who's another awesome character with so many good moments throughout the episode. There's a lot of great scenes in this episode between these characters, which also leads to many funny moments. I also like the story of this episode. It's fun seeing these monsters sneak out on Halloween and all the different shenanigans they get into. There's a couple of distinct scenes that use this concept well, showing the monsters getting involved with different Halloween related things. And each of them lead to fun results and some great jokes. Especially the gags around how terrible these monsters are at scaring kids, unless they're not trying to. I especially believe they get a lot of great moments out of the Halloween party scene. And right when some of this stuff could get repetitive or not as interesting, the episode switches gears and the rest of the episode focuses on Oblina and Crumb trying to hide this kid they accidentally brought back from the Grumble, and not get ousted for going up to the surface when they weren't supposed to. And we also see Ickis, who is stuck in the human world, getting into different shenanigans as he tries to not get revealed while he's waiting for his friends to come back. Both series of events lead to some really fun scenes, especially the on and off tension and surprises in the scenes with the Grumble and Ickis just completely failing at acting normal. But this episode ends on a really cool note as well. It's sick to see Ickis actually reveal he has potential to be a really good monster and see that shithead brother who's been awful all episode actually be put in his place. It's pretty funny and a great scene. And the last gag of option number 3 for our main character's punishments is a good one and is a follow-up on something that was set up earlier in the episode. There are other things on top of all of that I love about this one, including the atmosphere being awesome. And while there's nothing really creepy about this one, there are some slightly disturbing moments, and the atmosphere itself does give off a really cool spooky vibe. I also like how we get to see more of our main character's abilities throughout the episode through quick little moments and subtle details. This episode is just awesome and a great watch for Halloween. All this also makes me want to check out more of the show, which I might do. The reason it's so low on this list is because there are moments that are a little slow and less interesting, and while the episode does go really far with most of its ideas, I think it could have done a little more with some of the stuff in the back end. Also, there's nothing here that's really exceptional, which is not something I can say for some of the episodes coming up, but it's still a great one that deserved a spot on this list.
Good hang time. Go ahead.
Halloween, all through the night. We should be filled with
So this is one I saw a lot as a kid, and absolutely loved as a big viewer of the Fairly OddParents, but wasn't sure exactly how I would feel about this episode now, after not seeing it or really much of Fairly OddParents at all in a long time. But I still love it. For a Butch Hartman show, this episode has no right being a million times better than the Danny Phantom Halloween episode. But it is, because this episode actually has a great story, likable and sympathetic characters, and at least to an extent hilarious jokes. But not to compare it too much to that episode. I'll talk about why all these elements are very good on their own terms. So yeah, the story is great. This episode sets up perfectly just how crappy Timmy's Halloween is, and how he gets screwed over at every turn. Literally everything that happens to him is hilarious because of how ridiculous it is, but goes to demonstrate just how bad of a Halloween Timmy is having. And while many things that are happening are over the top, some of them are pretty relatable for kids. Sometimes you're not able to get the best costume because you're not rich, and you get stuck trick-or-treating with people you don't want to be going with. That doesn't mean the show doesn't get hilarious stuff out of these examples though, and play them up to a really crazy extent. My favorite jokes are them getting reflective tape for safety, and then that coming back to put them in danger later, and Timmy's mom and dad going as each other, which is super cursed. And then they give some of Timmy's stuff to these rich kids who just clear out all night, which is also so funny because of how ridiculously they play it up. But at the same time, it can feel that way for a middle-class child. It can seem like rich kids just get whatever they want, whenever they want, when you are that age. And it is very much true an amount of the time. You understand why Timmy makes this wish, even though it's short-sighted and he should have been more specific. Like most Fairly OddParents episodes. All this leads into the Real and Scary song, which is awesome and fills me with so much nostalgia. I absolutely love it, and it's one of the most fun and best things from any of these episodes. Not quite as good as the Christmas Everyday song, but that's a high bar. When that's finished and Timmy's wish goes through, the episode becomes this tense blast, as Timmy has to work around this weird world he has created to stop the real Jackobots he also created from destroying the world, while the Yugopotamians watch from the sidelines, and you're never quite sure what they're gonna do or if they're gonna get involved, which adds another element of suspense. It's so fun watching Timmy trying to figure out how to overcome these challenges proposed by this new world, and use certain things to his advantage when trying to defeat the Jackobots. It leads to some great twists and turns, and a pretty awesome final fight. Even throughout this, there's still so many good jokes and funny moments. I love how even after becoming the Jackobots for real, the rich kids still kind of have their same dumb voices, especially as they're counting down the doomsday device. And Cosmo's quip about the piñata kills me every time. The ending throws a few clever twists in there to end the episode on a fantastic note, to give us a textbook example of how an episode can use the Halloween holiday to its fullest advantage, especially in a fantasy show. It's not any higher because I wish they could have done more with this concept in the back end. I remember the Yugopotamians playing a bigger role in the story, and I remember a little more fun and interesting stuff happening throughout, making the episode even more fun. They definitely could have expanded this concept further, but alas, it's still a great time.
59, 58, 57.
Surprise, this isn't my number 1, or even 2, though I'm not sure how many people actually thought this one would make it that high. I'm betting at least a few did. So yeah, while this one isn't nearly as good as its Christmas and Valentine's Day counterparts, it's still an amazing Hey Arnold and Halloween episode, and another great special from the show. I have talked about this one before in my season 2 list and said most of what I wanted to say there, so I won't talk too long about this one, but I will give at least some brief thoughts. This episode is just so much fun and has such a great story they get the absolute most out of. For how much praise I've given this one in the past, I forgot how good the pacing in this episode is. I love how the episode slowly sets up all these little elements and different character motivations leading into every element of the big prank that Arnold and Gerald pulls off. And through this, we get to see everyone's interesting reaction and involvement to it, which is a ton of fun and such a great sequence. And then the rest of the episode is just this tense race against the clock to save Arnold's friends from getting hurt, because everyone thinks they're aliens, including Big Bob, because of this weird TV show host who is a great character and also plays a fun role of edging everyone on and sowing chaos. Every element of this episode just works so well, and it's such an engaging watch. Every twist and turn is super fun and keeps you on your toes. There are so many great little writing moments throughout that either strengthen the story, like some of Helga's moments with her dad, or are hilarious, showcasing just what a masterclass of good writing the show can be. It uses Halloween perfectly to create such a good plot and has amazing Halloween-y atmosphere. This show in its early seasons always really nailed atmosphere, especially in its specials, and I would be hard-pressed to call this episode the best example of that, but it is still so good, and it really heightens this episode a lot. I think through its atmosphere and tone, this is one of the few classic Nicktoons episodes that really nails what it feels like to be a kid on Halloween. It just happens to center around this really chaotic story. And the story itself is even cooler than I've made it out to be, because it was based off the infamous 1938 reading of War of the Worlds, which led to hysteria in real life. It is one of the coolest episode inspirations, I swear. Honestly, I'm running out of stuff to discuss, because unlike the other two Hey Arnold specials I've talked about in this series, this episode isn't actually that deep. There are some interesting character dynamics that lead to great scenes, but they're all used to make this episode more interesting and exciting, making it a blast from start to finish. And that's really all I can say to sum this one up. The reason it's not number one is because, well, on paper, it's kind of the perfect Halloween episode. There were two episodes that I thought were even more ambitious, and because of that, I got more out of those than I did with this one. And the first one I'm gonna talk about came as quite a surprise for me.
That was you! Oh, very impressive.
So this one is something else. I've seen episodes of Angry Beavers here and there, and honestly, it's another show that's fine. I found some episodes pretty funny, and others just very average cartoon episodes. But this one is one of the funniest and most creative Nicktoons episodes ever made. Easily the funniest episode of the Nicktoons Halloween specials. But why is that? Well, because this episode is just one big parody / love letter, I guess, to old cheesy Monster B movies, and cartoons and even comic books a little bit. And it is so faithful to these source materials, and it's so interesting to see the show's take on these things as the Beavers get in the middle of this B-movie monster plot. But it's also hilarious because the episode gets mountains of jokes out of every little detail of this episode. Everything in this episode is some weird setup to a hilarious joke or goofy reference. From the characters' names, like Man Savante, to the weird ways these people talk, to how repetitive some of the information and dialogue is, and how convoluted the story is, along with all these different twists and the motivations making absolutely no sense behind what some of the characters in this episode do, especially especially the villain. And that's not even where the jokes end, because there's also jokes about the different characters' stupid character foils and how they're all archetypes of the characters you usually see in B movies. And they fit the roles that are usually designated to characters in B movies as well. Like the scientist who is just there to explain things and sit in the background and make weird inventions. And the girl who just serves to hurt both her ankles in hilarious fashion and is basically just there to get in the way of people. There's also super over-the-top special effects along with very stilted action and just so much more. But I'm gonna stop just listing jokes because that would get repetitive, and this is truly just a love letter to this kind of media with jokes for days out of it. And how they incorporate the Beavers and their humor into all this is also awesome and hilarious as well. They also have many great moments, weirdly being the straight men to all the nonsense going on with this B-movie stuff, which adds even more humor. Also, for how much of a nonsense story this is, so much exciting and entertaining stuff is happening that you're glued to the screen the entire time to see what crazy thing or twist the story will take next. And you're never disappointed with whatever crazy nonsensical turn they actually do take. It's absolutely glorious. It's an amazing Halloween special, despite taking place the day before Halloween, because it's just a love letter to one of the best parts of the spooky season. I love horror movies and old cartoons, so I was drawn to this episode immediately. In every element around horror B movies and cheap cartoons they can make jokes around, they do, and then some. And it's just something that is worth a watch because it's just such a wonderful experience. I think out of every episode on this list, this is the one I would suggest the most. It truly needs to be seen to be believed with how ridiculously funny and well written it is. But there's still one episode that's just better.
And to think they did it without using their tongues.
But before we get into that, here are 3 honorable mentions. While there weren't a ton of great Halloween episodes, there were still many good ones, and some really good episodes that deserve to at least get a mention here. Out of the 3 Wild Thornberrys episodes I could have picked, this one was easily the best. The premise of this one is really interesting, and the setting and atmosphere are so good. It sets such a distinct spooky vibe. And I love how this episode balances being legitimately a little unnerving as you're never quite sure what's gonna be around the corner, and an absolute joke with this weirdo who's obsessed with vampires and who you come to realize isn't actually a threat at all. I think this episode's weird balancing act of these 2 elements is its strongest element. How, because Eliza and her sister are trying to scare each other, you're kind of on edge about when one might retaliate against the other, but this also makes you even more on edge that something you think is a prank is actually something involving this weird vampire-obsessed man, and one of them is in more danger than they might suspect, or vice versa. It creates such a good balance of legitimately good tension and some hilarious scenes. Also, this weird vampire-obsessed man has his moments of being really creepy, and I like that Nigel doesn't really care because he thinks it will get him interesting footage and something cool for his TV show. But at the same time, he's also a total nut in a kinda super lame way. And Nigel realizes, as we do, there's nothing cool or supernatural or even scientific going on here, and this dude is just nuts. There's also other really funny moments throughout, and they also spoof and get fun inspiration out of different vampire tropes. This is just a really fun and unique Halloween episode that was very close to making the list proper, but I just enjoyed watching the Aaahh! Real Monsters episode a little more. But I had only seen a few episodes of Wild Thornberrys in recent years before watching this one, and I gotta say, I was really impressed by this, and overall am liking what I've seen of the show. This isn't the best episode of SpongeBob by any means, and is probably in the lower half of Season 1, which tells you how good Season 1 is, I guess, because it's still a really good episode. But it probably isn't that much better than a number of the Nicktoons Halloween episodes I won't be talking about. The concept is good, and they get some fun scenes out of it, and it uses the holiday well. It does also have great spooky Halloween atmosphere that is the other episode in this set that taps into what it feels like to be a kid on Halloween just through that alone, which is also strengthened by my nostalgia for this episode. I watched this one every year as a kid, and I've seen it an amount since. Also, the ending is really clever and is one of the best SpongeBob endings. But what elevated this episode above the others that I didn't put in the honorable mentions, besides the great atmosphere, which in all seriousness isn't better than some of the other episodes on this list, is just that this episode is really funny. Every joke works, and there's a few really iconic ones that land. It's not more funny than a lot of other episodes in Season 1, but SpongeBob, when it's good, kinda stands in a league of its own, which was enough for a mid-tier episode of the first season that's still really good to sneak its way into this video. Like the Danny Phantom episode, this one is a little disappointing. An Invader Zim Halloween episode has every right to be amazing, for how there are some episodes of the show that are not just creepy or scary, but legitimately disturbing. A Halloween episode of this show should easily take the #1 spot on this list. For the record, this is still a really good episode of Invader Zim that has a fun plot that takes us to this weird, creative, and kind of messed up world and gets a ton of humor out of that, along with Zim and Dib's confrontations. I do also kind of appreciate that for a show as dark and messed up as this one, they decided to make a really funny Halloween special as some sort of strange contrast that is still a little more messed up, but is pretty tame for this show compared to other things, to just focus more on comedy, which I guess it does succeed at because there are so many funny moments. I also do really like some of the monster designs and personalities, especially with some of them being weird and honestly less messed up versions of their human counterparts, which is part of the humor. With that said, they could have done so much more with this plot and world, and this episode does leave something more to be desired in some places, which does bring it down, but it's still a really good episode of Invader Zim that has fun with the Halloween in Zim's world idea, and the rest of the episode is really, really fun and just a great time. But with all that said, let's finish this list and get into what I consider to be the best classic Nicktoons Halloween episode.
Maybe my head is big.
It's not fair. I probably shouldn't have added this episode to the roster. Avatar: The Last Airbender is the best show ever made and is leagues above most Nicktoons. And this episode isn't even one of the absolute strongest episodes of Season 3 in my opinion. And the last two episodes I talked about are truly fantastic. And yet, this episode clears both of them pretty easily, and it was never in doubt that this was gonna take my #1 spot. But why is this episode so good and so much better than its competitors? Well, for one thing, this is the only episode in this roster that is actually scary. Bloodbending is legitimately horrifying, and there are some deeply disturbing scenes demonstrating it. This episode also does a great job showing the horrors of war and how it can destroy a community And through Hama herself, you see such a messed up and tragic character, and throughout her story, we get to see how brutal prisons of the Fire Nation that took away everything from her and trapped her in this disgusting, inhumane setting, while the guards keep her chained while giving her water to drink, and how that completely breaks her in a really unsettling but very moving way. This episode is so rich in the issues it tackles relating to war and trauma from war, along with the ethics around when certain techniques or weapons to win a battle are too far or blatantly unethical, through the discussion around bloodbending itself. I've seen people criticize this episode for Hama being too simple and just an evil bad guy, and the episode not treating her as a product of war and the Fire Nation's atrocities and awful actions, and say the episode doesn't touch on that enough or even at all. And I fundamentally disagree. Hama is a crazy, deeply disturbed woman who thinks she is justified in using this sick technique that she should have only used to escape on civilians as some weird act of revenge. But this episode goes through great lengths to show that she is a product of her entire community and everyone she loves and cared about being destroyed by war and the Fire Nation, and having her spirit essentially broken in the horrible conditions of a Fire Nation prison. This episode is really nuanced and thoughtful in how it showcases these topics. It really goes all out in showcasing them. To get away from some of the deeper aspects of this episode for a second, I just love how the story is told in pace. The episode opens on such a good note and sets the mood for the rest of the episode perfectly, as it slowly sets up this mystery around Hama, and then when you have that fake out in the middle of the episode where they reveal she's from the Water Tribe, you get some interesting lore around the Water Tribe, and you get some answers to some stuff from earlier episodes. But at the same time, you start to become more suspicious of Hama. And as this is happening, she starts showing Katara these waterbending techniques that might be a little unethical. Nothing super bad at all by any means, but she is still damaging the environment, as Katara points out. And it's the fact that Hama doesn't seem to think twice about this that makes you even more skeptical about her and kind of nervous about what she is gonna show Katara next. And I think this episode does such a good job through the mystery of the missing people and what's really going on with Hama, along with some of these light ethical questions leading perfectly into, but still making the introduction of bloodbending and how undeniably messed up it is really shocking. And just how messed up Hama and her story are. And I love the conversation between her and Katara after she reveals who she really is and what she's done, and how they do share some undeniable things in common, and both have the potential for this, but Katara fundamentally disagrees with bloodbending. But through their conversation and fight, you feel her getting even closer to having to learn this, but hope that she will find another way to win without stooping down to that level. But you can't shake the fact that she won't. Not just because Hama is a difficult foe, but because you see Katara use some of the techniques Hama taught her that she kind of questioned earlier without any hesitation now, to be stronger and hold her own in this fight, which is such a sick little detail. But even with this, you're still hoping that's all she will use, and you know for a fact that's what Katara is intending on doing. And even though it might be predictable that tragically and sadly Katara does inevitably go through with using bloodbending, it doesn't change how shocking and upsetting this ending is. Hama won. There's no way around it. This is something Katara has in her now, and is something she's gonna have to live with. It's so fucked up, but is so powerful, and I love that this episode leaves you on that haunting note, and lets the audience kinda decide exactly what they want to make of all this. This episode is just a masterpiece. It is so disturbing, but such a rich and complex tale that brings to light the horrors of war and ethics of certain kinds of bending through such an amazing character, and Katara's interesting but devastating dynamic with her, which leads to many creepy and disgusting moments involving bloodbending, which once again is legitimately horrifying, just the way it's animated and the sounds it makes, and even ignoring the fact that bloodbending itself is just such a disgusting and horrifying concept, they really showcase that on the screen in such a brutally effective way. Top that all off with an interesting mystery, great pacing, and awesome atmosphere, and you have yourself the Puppetmaster, easily the best classic Nicktoons Halloween episode.
I've never felt more alive.
And with all that said, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe for more videos similar to this in the future. Also, leave me a comment down below telling me what you thought of my list and what your own would have been. The month of Halloween is not over quite yet. In fact, it's barely even started. I have 2 more videos I'm gonna release, and I'll finally reveal them to you. The first part in a video ranking every episode of the Owl House 2nd season will be released next Saturday, and part 2 will be released on Halloween. I hope you're excited for that, and until then, this is Chocolate Guy, signing off.